Construction Big Breakfast, where we give you a hearty serving of insider tips and business strategies to help fuel your day so you can thrive in the construction industry. Now, here's your host, Brendan Morahan.
Hello and welcome to the next edition of Construction Big Breakfast. Delighted to say I am today joined by Miles Ashley, who I've known for many years. Good morning, Miles.
Hi.
Delighted you're able to join
Delighted
us.
to be here in your new offices.
Well, thank you very much. In fact, they feel as though we've been here a long time. Exactly. So, Miles, you and I have known each other for a long time.
Yes.
I've known you in some of the major schemes that you've been involved in, major corporations in the past. And today we wanted to talk particularly about Project 13, that I know you're passionately involved in
I talk a lot about that.
and believe in as you do.
I do.
Word of warning, we only have 25 minutes, so if you could keep it succinct.
Yeah.
But I think our viewers would be very keen to get more of an insight to the detail behind Project 13 and how it really applies to the real world.
Yeah.
But before we do that, 2 questions.
Yes.
What did you have for breakfast this morning?
Well, I had eggs Benedict this morning. And I don't always have that, but I knew you were going to ask that question. And so those made from eggs from my own hens, which often wander around the kitchen. And there was a very low carbon footprint on the whole breakfast until I cooked it on the Argo.
But enjoyable, and it's sitting comfortably.
My favourite breakfast.
And washed down with a Bordeaux, or
no, I just a light tea.
Very good. Well, I had my usual porridge mixed with raisins and banana.
Good.
A couple of flat whites, and now raring to go. Excellent. So the second question is, what gives you the right to talk about Project 13? What's your background, and how has that informed your involvement in Project 13, and why you think the output of Project 13 is so important?
Yes, okay. I suppose I've got a bit of an eclectic career past, really, because I started as a civil engineer working for main contractors and on motorway projects, actually, amongst many others. And then I ended up running a rail business for a main contractor. And they say you never escape the rail industry, so that kept coming back. I then had my own business for a time. I had a development business, and I bought into a project manager, Class and Goff. And then I had decided consciously to have a career change, went off to do a single-handed sailing race to the Azores and back, and ended up in Transport for London. And I think I wanted to get back to being a practitioner in a client organisation. So I ended up at Transport for London as the Director of Construction. So I ran all of those major station schemes that we did together, and the line extensions. And then I left there in 2016 after 8 years. I think that's enough for me, for anybody. And I took a charitable role as a master of a livery company, and then set up my own business, Wessex Advisory. So we advise clients and contractors and the tier 1 consultants as well.
So you feel you've got quite a holistic view of the industry, good, bad and otherwise?
Well, I suppose the point about all of that is that the industry does things to people who are sitting in different positions within that commercial model. And I think I've felt some of the opportunities and pain of sitting in those positions throughout my career. So I suppose I've got some perspective on how those commercial models work and what they really mean for people. Yeah.
One of the quotes that I remember from you that really resonated with me, and I'd just be interested to know how that runs through everything that you've done since, and particularly in regard to Project 13.
I wonder what this is going to be.
I'll keep that one a secret for another time. But the one that particularly strikes me is to do with Bank Station. And this whole concept about how the industry can win through their good ideas rather than just winning tactically or on a bid that may or may not be correct. Yeah. What informed your thinking of that, and how has that been brought forward into Project 13, if at all, would you say?
I think it's directly relevant. I mean, I have a view that I think both as a contractor as clients, we get trapped by transactions in essence. That we don't tie those transactions down well because you can't, because actually over time everything changes. You discover more about what you're facing in terms of geotechnics or stakeholders, the commercial environment changes, the political environment changes. And actually, the impact on some of these major projects is largely about time, driven by some of those impacts. So Bank was really about trying to find and condition the company, Transport for London, to do things in a slightly different way. And I wanted particularly to try and experiment with putting an outcome requirements into the market to see whether the market could beat our solution,
Sure.
Our predetermined solution, which of course in any other circumstances we would have gone to the market and sought bids on. And in the end, Dragados won. I have to say that all of the contractors came back with a better solution than we had produced. But Dragados' solution, certainly was cheaper, but overall if you fed it back into the Transport for London business case, it was 50% more value. I think it was really pleasing because I think we put a challenge out as an infrastructure owner to say this is what we've got. At the time in benchmarking terms we were nearly the best in the world, but the market came back with something very significantly better, and I think it just it's underpinned, I think, a belief that I have that actually we work in a very inventive marketplace. People are instinctively innovative, and if you give them a challenge, they'll generally beat it. And that gives me a great deal of optimism, I think. So Project 13 has been about moving away from that transactional environment that I think is so restrictive, and that both the supply chain and their clients are victims of. Mm-hmm. So the original report was entitled From Transactions to Enterprise.
Yeah. And if my limited knowledge of it, you've got a much more detailed knowledge. The three tenets of it are about the improvement of productivity. Well, who wouldn't want that? Yeah. Either as a nation or as a business. If it's about digital transformation, again, very hot topic all round. But it's the issue of business sustainability that I'm particularly interested in.
Yes.
Because going back to your example there, that if it's an industry that's about innovation, then that costs time and money to innovate. If it isn't recognised and rewarded, then how do we make that sustainable? Yeah. So do you want to pick off each of those three tenets, but maybe starting with that sustainability issue, and how Project 13 can help both big and small organisations?
Yeah, you say who wouldn't want that, and I think actually that's a theme running through the whole of Project 13, if I can sort of take a step back and typify it. Project 13 is not an invention. I don't think. I don't think we've invented anything. I think it is essentially an observational development. Yeah. Now, some of that was quite sophisticated, and UCL were involved, and Reading University, but it comes essentially from a group of clients talking to representatives within their supply chain over an extended period of time about what works. Yeah. And how how we could codify what works. So it's largely observational, and I think if you step through its key tenets, which are governance, integration, organisation, capability, and digital transformation, you can take any one of those and say, why wouldn't you want a betterment in that area? Why wouldn't you want better integration between the parties? Between the business of design and delivery, why wouldn't you want better integration between the outcomes that a client wants and the productivity of the supply chain? Why wouldn't you want to increase the sophistication of your governance to produce those outcomes? And why wouldn't you want to leverage the latest digital platforms with the most capable people in the best organisation possible to produce the outcomes? So you can take any of those principles and you can say, why wouldn't you want those? And they are very simple principles. But what we observed was that where there are very successful exemplars within infrastructure delivery, they have all of them, and they have all of them to a greater level of maturity than anywhere else. Mm-hmm. They're not focusing on one of them. I think you can also look through a whole series of, let's say, National Audit Office reports, and you can identify those characteristics as being given as the reasons for major project failure, and we can point at a few today, although I don't actually want to. But those themes, in terms of the failure mechanism, repeat. Whilst they're very simple principles, actually, they have some pretty far-reaching consequences. And in the original report, we tried to lay out, how you might develop maturity across that band of characteristics. And in terms of governance, as you sort of step through how you might drive sophistication in governance, lots to be learned from the UK Corporate Governance Code, but trying to develop long-term relationships with the supply chain and engage that supply chain to help you govern the organisation towards defined outcomes. Well, actually, most infrastructure owners are a long way from that.
And why is that? Is that because they don't have the belief that the industry can respond? Is it because they don't have the skills and capabilities internally? Why is it falling down? If it's such common sense.
I simply think it's because it's a very difficult thing to do in that sort of organisation.
But valuable.
Well, exponentially valuable, I think. We often cite the example of Anglia Water. You have this really clear idea of what it's trying to do for its customers and what it's trying to drive in terms of customer outcomes. Of course, underpinned by that by that system of regulation. But you can see the follow through and how that then translates into the business drivers and their strategic objectives. And how that then follows through to the supply chain or the way in which it manages its assets. There are very good examples, I think, of businesses that have really worked out methodologies for enabling that consistency between that follow through between outcomes and the way in which it deals with its supply chain. And I'd also cite Highways England for having made enormous efforts, I think, over the last few years to define what it values within its business and how its customers value what it is doing for them. For trying to find mechanisms for turning that into reality. Because ultimately, that's got to drive a group of people that are integrated, that have representatives from the people who are responsible for delivering and operating that investment, and it has to drive their decision-making processes. At its most basic, it has to drive a design decision-making process that will enable the right product to serve that outcome.
But if it's going to be truly sustainable, it needs the industry and businesses within the industry to be able to respond with an appropriate commercial model to become self-sustaining. So you cite a couple of examples there that are good for the client, good for the asset owner, but for it to be successful over the long term, as I say, it's got to be sustainable, and therefore it's got to have a supply chain that can buy into that. Now, there is a lot of scepticism in the marketplace as to whether the supply chain is being treated as a true partner in that. Now, is that because they're not trusted, or is it because the supply side isn't really embracing that and investing in the future sustainability of that model?
Yeah, and I'd say to you, and I think a lot of people have got this sort of slightly wrong, that it's not a contract. Okay, it's a set of principles.
But the commercial model around that, because I think sorry to interrupt, but I think this is where it really hits the ground, doesn't it? That people are running businesses and they've got to make choices.
They do, yeah.
And they have got to decide which model they're going to follow.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is you don't need to pick up that version of the commercial model and apply it. Okay, to my mind, your key objective in trying to follow Project 13 is to use those principles that are so often cited as failure mechanisms or the reasons why projects go well, and to be cognizant about how you develop maturity in those areas, and to develop commercial models that are appropriate for your business. Now, sometimes those outcomes will be apparent, kind of in the short term. I think one of the reasons why the water industry has made so much progress in this area is because it's got a very clear system of regulation. It's got a very clear definition of what outcomes need to be produced and actually you can see those in quite, in the short term. It may be more complicated for somebody like Network Rail, of course, or Highways England, who are looking at driving a strategic transport network, across, a whole nation over a period of time. And so I would say to you that, one, nobody owns Project 13. It was great to be, to chair the original report and to be a co-author in it. But it's certainly not mine. It's not mine anymore. The Institution of Civil Engineers, are providing leadership for Project 13. And it comes from a group of clients who were driven to do something better, to get better value for their investment and from their customers. And the reason that they have done that, and the reason that I think the supply chain have so comprehensively engaged with it, is because everybody knows that the current transactional processes are extraordinarily inefficient. So I'd say that both client and supply chain are victims of the current set of circumstances, and the opportunity for them both is better outcomes, better sustainability, and better margins.
So you're seeing
a better working relationship. Actually, if you look back at that report and you look at the level of transaction costs within the industry, or you look at the level of waste, or you look at the unsustainable level of profits, there is, a well full of data that says that our current model, simply isn't working, and it doesn't stand comparison with other industrial sectors, where against these characteristics they are simply more sophisticated.
So are you seeing confidence that the supply side is engaging? They were the words you said.
Yes.
And you see that they are engaging and therefore pulling away from the pack.
Yes.
And that you can see the supply model is actually going to be very different in the future to the way it currently is. And if so, how will that look?
I think the supply model will be affected by all sorts of things, not least actually the infrastructure owners are waking up to the value of data. And I think we will see as a result of that, kind of longer term models which tend, relationships which tend to build value through the consolidation and sophistication of data. So they will be looking at longer term partners, to be able to do that. So that's one thing that I think will inevitably break down transactional arrangements. I think secondly that clients now understand that whilst they couldn't necessarily see it before and may not have been interested in, I think over recent years they've been nothing short of astounded by the level of transaction costs within the model that they now have to use. I think there's a lot of custom and practice to unwind before we can get to those better relationships. But I think when you look at these procurement processes that are buying, a supposedly coherent definition of the works for X, but actually those contracts are outturning, pretty much on average at 50% above, those bid prices. And as we know in many of the major projects that we're dealing with, and no doubt because of the complexity, many times above that, one has to ask whether there is any, real value in that procurement process as we currently operate it.
But isn't this key, Miles, and I therefore question the leadership within the industry? Because if, as we both agree, why wouldn't you do this?
Yeah.
And yet you say that custom and practice is an inhibitor to that. Custom and practice can be changed, not overnight, but it can be changed progressively and pretty quickly.
Yes.
With the right leadership, with the right message and the right vision. So why is it not happening quicker and more systemically through the industry?
I think the people that sit at the, that have the ability to change that situation sit in client organisations. Infrastructure owners. And they're operating businesses that are often kind of very tactical in their mindset and their management processes, and I think actually that there's a lot of work to do to ensure that those organisations understand the risk and cost of taking a transactional route, when actually at the start of those programmes it looks so blindly justifiable.
Yeah.
It's a sort of nobody got far for buying IBM kind of mentality, isn't it? Everybody looks disappointed at the end of these projects, but actually is stamping their heels at the beginning. And those operators often sit at the meeting point between the politician and the practitioner. And the politicians famously are tough on stuff and tough on the causes of stuff. And I think in a political mindset that they understand transaction but don't understand the complexity of infrastructure delivery. It's very interesting. I think it's online somewhere, but we recently represented the ICE at a parliamentary select committee and touched on some of these subjects and Project 13 in the context, I think, of many major projects facing a great deal of difficulty despite the incredible capability of the people kind of running and operating within them. And so we had the opportunity to present a paper on the gap between estimates and outturns on major infrastructure projects, which we did with the IPA and the DFT. I don't think we're saying anything that people haven't known for a long time. No. I think the problem is that we perhaps have failed to articulate it, and we've built business models that help us to sustain businesses in that environment. But it's not the route to a better future, and ultimately infrastructure provides a better future for our country. And I think with Project 13, if we've achieved anything, we've achieved a discontinuity, a rip in the space-time continuum, and allowed people to have these conversations. And those conversations are now spreading globally. So I was talking to someone in New York just before Christmas on a £50 billion programme, and they're interested in those concepts and how they will apply them to achieve their challenge. There are a number of water clients in Australia and New Zealand that are using them. There are conversations across Europe, in Norway. So I think it actually, might find traction outside the constraints of our own governmental systems, and it might find a global audience.
And it has certainly prompted debate. There's an interesting piece of work come out of the Construction Innovation Hub on business models and the like, and it's getting people thinking. I suppose, just to wrap up, it's all good, it's all academic, it all makes sense. Have you got a feel for what the industry and people listening to us now, how they could get engaged, and what could they do differently if they're doing their business plans for the next year? What is the one thing you would encourage businesses to do to really start getting behind the messages that we've spoke about this morning?
I think it's a matter of leadership and advocacy, and at whatever level you are within the industry, you can find a surprising platform. I think we should have been better in how we promoted it. We weren't prepared, I think, for some of the success in its rollout, or the number of adopters that would take it on. To that end, we've now got a separate structure within the ICE, Institution of Civil Engineers, for Project 13. Later this year, you will see a portal develop, and you'll also see a thought leadership group develop around that, as well as the group that already represents the supply chain and the early adopters. So there'll be a new structure emerging for Project 13. That portal will allow everybody, across the world, access to best practice information. It will allow them access to other people who are trying to advocate and practice these ideas, and it'll allow them to get involved in some of the thought leadership and the development. I said nobody owns it. What we really need is Project 14.
Yes. Well, look, to that end, Mark, it's finished too quickly, unfortunately. I think maybe the next podcast we can talk about the potential for Project 14. And what I think we can do as part of this is make sure we put a link in as part of this podcast to all of the great work that you and others have done in this regard. But for now, I really appreciate you coming in to talk to us about that. And we're right beside you with this. It's our mission about creating value through construction, and we can't do it on our own.
Brenna,
we need the industry together. So really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. I hope you found it interesting. Obviously, the links will be there at the end to Miles and ourselves and to Project 13 itself. Please do get engaged. It's important. We'd love to hear from you and look forward to seeing you again next time. Bye for now.
Invennt has a 100% success rate with R&D tax credits, bringing in over £77 million in qualified costs for businesses just like you. We offer a complimentary, confidential review of your business to see where you're leaving money on the table. Contact us at www.inventt.com to book a consultation today. Thanks for joining us this week on the Construction Big Breakfast. Make sure to visit our website, www.inventt.com, where you can subscribe to the Construction Big Breakfast on all platforms so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a positive rating. Or if you'd simply share it with a friend, that would help us out too. Be sure to tune in for our next episode.